You're listening to Soundside. I'm Libby Dankman. The story of Amanda Knox has been told many times, and there have been several versions. There were the sensational allegations laid out by an Italian prosecutor of a University of Washington exchange student who, in 2007, murdered her British roommate as part of a sex game gone wrong. That story landed Knox in Italian prison for almost 4 years, and that story was fiction. Then there were the clickbaity tabloid exploits of Foxy Knoxy, the sex-obsessed luciferina. This story, also wrong, kept Amanda confined in another way, branded with a reputation that she couldn't shake. There were also Lifetime movies, documentaries, and countless books, including a couple by Knox herself, that told the true story of a young woman wrongly convicted and caught up by legal and media forces larger than herself. Now, for the first time, she's using scripted television to tell her story the way she wants. She is the executive producer of a new series called The Twisted Tale of Amanda Knox. By the way, that series is also executive produced by Monica Lewinsky. The first 2 episodes are available now on Hulu, and Amanda Knox is here with me now. Welcome, Amanda. It's nice to talk with you.
Oh, it's so great to be here.
So I think we've run through a few ways in which you've gotten your story out, your memoirs. I read Waiting to be Heard when it was released in 2013. And then you have a new book about kind of the post-exoneration life and reclaiming your life called Free, My Search for Meaning, that came out earlier this year. You also have a podcast, which I must say is so good, and it's called
Thank you.
Hard Knocks. Yeah, I've been listening this morning to the Monica Lewinsky episode, and you were interviewing Monica. And one of the things that you said to her caught my attention, which was when you were first freed, you had been approached about doing like movies or scripted things, and you really resisted that. Why did you hesitate at the time, and why was this the right time for this project?
Yeah, great question. I mean, back then when I was still just kind of recuperating my life, like trying to get back to this life that I wanted to be, which was this anonymous student who never had gone through this horrible experience, people were just coming out of the woodwork wanting to tell my story. And I think I resisted because it didn't really feel like my story, right? Like it was just the story of 2 young women who go to study abroad in Perugia, Italy, and only one of them survives. And that wasn't really a story, I thought, that said anything about Meredith or anything about me. It was just bad things that happened to 2 innocent young women. And so I really resisted the idea of going down this path that was telling a story that really didn't say anything about us as people, and instead said more about, these law enforcement professionals, or even the person who committed this crime. Like those are the people who actually did things, had agency, and created this traumatic event in the first place. But then all these years later, I've reclaimed my life in many ways, and I've made decisions that weren't just reactions to this very scary thing. I went back to Italy to confront my prosecutor, and I did that for a very specific reason. And I felt like that was truly a story, a very personal story of overcoming trauma, of confronting the thing that scares you. That was a more universal story that wasn't just, trauma. And I felt like I wanted to share that with people. And of course, to appreciate why I made that choice and why I took that risk, you have to go back in time and understand how this relationship with my prosecutor has developed over time. And when Monica reached out to me, it really was just the right person at the right time to tell this story, because she herself is this woman who had a negative media story take over her life and try to bury her. And in the same way that this terrible media story had tried to bury me. And we've emerged and come out as voices of reason and kindness and compassion. And so her having already paved the way in Hollywood, having EP'd her own story with impeachment, I just felt like she was absolutely the right partner to do this. And she, of course, she was, because she's brilliant and so thoughtful and so kind. And she really held my hand through this whole experience.
Just watching you two and listening to you two talk, it really crackles like the understanding that is underlying all of your interactions and the compassion. And you at one point referred to it as kind of like a big sister mentor relationship. Can you just tell me more about what it was like working with her on this and the meaning that it brought to have her on set, especially when you were going through some tough scenes that you were going to have to be sort of reliving certain very difficult points in your life?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. So I'm not only am I reliving these most difficult, terrifying moments of my life, but I'm also doing so in a context where my story was stolen from me. My identity was stolen from me. And so any kind of revisiting of these issues like makes me confront layer upon layer of traumatic experience. It wasn't just that my roommate was murdered. It wasn't just that the police went after me. It wasn't just that I was on trial for and in prison for 4 years. It's just the layers of trauma that I've had to carry with me and unpack over the years is something that she really greatly appreciates as somebody who, again, had a story used against her and had her own, personality and appearance and sexuality twisted and used against her and made to feel like she was trapped in this tiny little box that no one would let her, come out of. So like I mean, was there throughout the entire process, everything from when we were working on casting, everything from talking about breaking the story and how do we confront these moments in time where people were judging me and were judging me based upon, things that I actually did versus things that I didn't actually do. And how do we represent that in the story? And I think the thing that she and I both really agreed upon is, first of all, that the tail, like the length of time that trauma impacts your life is very long. It's not just this moment in time that everyone sees. It's not just the trial. Like this show, it has a much wider lens because it is interested in how trauma becomes a part of who you are and becomes a way that you experience the world moving forward. But beyond that, I think she also has a really great understanding, like I do, that everyone has their own context that they bring to a situation that consciously or unconsciously alters their interpretation of a series of events. So when we're talking about moments in time where I was judged, one of the things that we really do in the series is we show who had what information when. Because that's something that I think a lot of people forget about these like complicated, nuanced stories, is that there are certain moments in the unraveling in the early days of this traumatic event where I like have just been informed by the police that my roommate was raped and slaughtered. And then I walk into a room where there are other friends of my roommate who don't know this information yet. And so they're all sitting around going, "Oh, I hope she didn't suffer." And I just like reeling from the knowledge of like, oh my God, did she suffer? And my reaction to them is informed by my context, and their reaction to me is informed by their context. And so there's this like really interesting colliding of perspectives.
And can I ask about that too? Because that involves you coming off as not great. And there are a number of points in this series where obviously you are bringing the layers of who knew what when. And so it's understandable. But you, at the same time, are telling your own story. You're able to control your own story. And you, in order to not have it be, like a cartoon of, this is the great Amanda Knox, like you have to work to kind of show the not so graceful sides of you as well. Like how hard was that, or how did you approach that process in the creative process?
Well, I think for every single person that we depict in this show, we try to show, again, their context, and we try to have compassion for their context, including the fact that I was a 20-year-old kid who had no idea how to react to this situation. And so, yeah, there are moments where I'm oblivious. There are moments where I'm not as sensitive to other people's feelings because I'm super overwhelmed by my own. And so as much as we're showing, the mistakes and misadventures of other people, we're absolutely showing the mistakes and misadventures of myself.
It's one of those things where you watch Grace Van Patten, who plays you in the series, and I don't know you personally. I've seen you and interviewed you once before in the past. The way she is capturing some of your mannerisms or style of speech or the lightness in your youth, and then over time that changes with the weight of everything you're going through. What did it feel like to watch her embody that? And how, what did you say to her after the first time you saw that?
I mean, she's just incredible, right? Like she's such a pro and she has incredible instincts. And also she asks really great questions. And so this whole process has been hugely collaborative and welcoming. Like I felt very welcome on set where she was, depicting all of these crazy moments of my life. And again, like, on the one hand, yes, she asked me a lot of questions and we talked about like the different ways that I communicate, verbally, non-verbally, all these like interesting character nuances. But at the same time, I have to give her credit for having really great instincts. And she herself has said that like she found it really easy to put herself in my shoes because she's a theater kid. Like when she asked me like, what do they mean by quirky? What do they mean by weird? And I was like, well, those like theater kids in high school. And she was like, yes, I know exactly those theater kids in high school. And I was like, exactly. So like I don't know. She just really did, and it's so cool to see because not just myself, but people who know me who are watching this show get goosebumps watching her because she has like like you said, a lightness of being, a sort of skip in her step, a lilt in her voice that really is resonant, especially to the silly oblivious young person that I was at 20 years old. And that continues to exist in a different sort of burdened and haunted form to this day, but she just carried that so well and was so smart. So I'm just so grateful to her. Like, and if she does not get awards for this show, I will be flabbergasted. Like she just brought everything and did more than most actors are ever asked to do in such a short period of time.
The whole cast is amazing, and watching things for work, sometimes you sort of brace yourself. And I'm prepping for this interview with Amanda Knox. And so, I'm going to spin up the show really quick and watch a couple episodes. And I was like, oh, I'm watching the whole thing. Like, this is not like a work thing. This is genuinely just a really well made piece of television, and has a lot of people who really cared about it and put like artistry into it. I did speak with you a few years ago about a movie that has thankfully been pretty forgotten to history. It's called Stillwater. This is where Matt Damon played a father whose daughter was imprisoned in France. And the director was openly saying that this was based on your story, except they had taken a number of creative liberties, including, twist and spoiler for the end of Stillwater. Basically, the daughter is likely guilty of the murder in the end. And,
Right.
This is something that we talked about at the time as being so frustrating because of the impressions, many reasons, the impressions it would leave on people's minds, things like that. But I want to just contrast that with the way that you were able to put your stamp on this project. And it's, of course, personally important for you, but why is it important for audiences to know that you were behind it?
Yeah, and it's a great question because I also need to give absolute credit to to the creator and showrunner of this show, KJ Steinberg, who could have taken me on as like a token executive producer. Like ultimately, like this is, her show, she has the creative say, but she really, really cared to fold me into all of the creative discourse around this show because she felt like, one, my story has been told by and authored by other people in a million different ways, all exploiting, me and the terrible circumstances surrounding my roommate's death in all of these really unethical ways. And she did not want to participate in that whole ordeal. So she really wanted to bring me into the fold for that reason, but also because I think that she understood that I, as a creative partner, bring a sense of not just authenticity, but like there is this wonderful exchange of creativity where a person who is writing This Is Us and is this, incredible creative person in Hollywood and is deeply embedded in that world, comes into contact with someone like me who is a storyteller in my own right, but like is also has so much just like deep, rich material baked into me that those conversations where we're pulling from each other, or she's like going away and getting an idea and then bring it back to me and saying, "Hey, what do you think about doing an homage to Amélie?" And I go, "Oh my God, that's incredible. That's so good." Like that, I feel like the thing that we wanted to prove with this series is that sources can be a great can be creative collaborative partners, and they need not necessarily be, held at arm's length. And I think that KJ really proved that to be the case here. And she was so generous. She invited me to co-write the final episode with her. Like that is just unheard of in the world of Hollywood. And it's really thanks to her generosity and her vision that I was able to participate so actively.
It's also, I would insert, thanks to you as a creative partner, that she would realize that that was possible and that that was going to be fruitful. So this series, just for people who haven't seen it, giving a little background, the series starts with a scene depicting your return to Perugia in 2022. And this kind of provides a framework, like why you would go back and want to meet with the prosecutor who had done so much harm in your life. And I know you've answered this question a number of times, but why did you go back, and why was that significant to start that conversation with him, or to have that conversation in person with him?
Yeah, well, this is where it gets back to this, how this story becomes more universal, right? Like in our lives, things happen to us and people hurt us. And I think that a lot of us end up feeling haunted by the way that we've been hurt by people in our lives. And I'm the kind of person who, for better or for worse, confronts the things that haunt me, confronts the things that scare me, because I want to understand. I just want to understand why. And I was not satisfied with easy answers like, oh, he's just evil. He doesn't care that he threw an innocent girl in jail. Like, I never believed that to be true. And instead, this story, and, again, KJ's vision for this story as well was to explore how people with good intentions could cause harm. How is it that somebody could be so entrenched in their own mindset that they're imposing a harmful reality on another human being, thinking that they are justified, that they are righteous? And then how do you have that conversation where you begin to unravel that harm? How do you build bridges that are seemingly impossible to build? That's the story of what, like, me as an adult human, like, this is what I care about. This is what I'm attempting to do in my life. And of course, it's informed by all of the things that happened to me in the past. But like this choice of trying to build a bridge and trying to create understanding, trying to find common ground is a way to approach these universal feelings of harm and hurt and irresolution. And I think that that is where I hope this story really touches people, is like that feeling of, okay, we are all at odds. We all are in alternate realities where there are completely different facts on different sides. How do we find some kind of understanding between each other? And what could that look like?
There's a line in the first episode where you say something along the lines of like, this was the point where I realized, like, after this point in the story, there is no universal truth, that it's all subjective. And does truth actually exist if no one believes it? Like, does a tree fall in the woods, and if you don't,
Yeah,
if nobody's
exactly.
around it? Yeah. And I wonder, yeah, I hate to bring up the current political climate, but I wonder how much of what's happening today in our world, and with the, let me gesture all around us, the way that truth seems to be impossible to
In
find. It's,
question.
yeah, like how much of that are you able to sort of maybe have an extra layer of understanding because of what you've been through?
Oh, 100%. I mean, the terms echo chambers and alternate facts weren't, just terms that everyone was aware of back in 2007 when I was arrested. But I mean, that was exactly what was happening in my case, especially because it was at the blossoming of like social media, and how social media was siphoning off people into, again, alternate realities, alternate facts. And so I experienced that very firsthand, very personally 20 years ago. And I think that's a reality that every one of us is facing more or less in the political climate that we exist in. And so I feel like I've had a long time to wrap my head around it, around that problem and how we might find solutions. And again, like this show is one of those very personal attempts at crossing that bridge, which seems impossible to cross.
You told Vanity Fair that you did not lose your blank. This is NPR, so I gotta say blank on set. Throughout the filming, except for one scene, and this was a scene where you were questioned by Italian authorities about the murder of Meredith Kercher. What happened in that scene that triggered that reaction in you, if it's okay if I ask about that? Because
Yeah. So I lost my mind watching this interrogation scene because it truly was the worst thing that I had ever experienced. It was worse than getting the verdict, the guilty verdict. It was worse than all of my time that I spent in prison, was being led on this psychological journey through lies and gaslighting to believe, like truly believing that I could have witnessed my friend's crime and completely like blacked it out and feeling utterly insane. Like I just did not know what was true or not anymore. And I think that there was that level of trauma of it, like reliving that very traumatic psychological journey that you experience when you watch that scene, but also just the layers upon layers of trauma in the aftermath where I've been victim blamed for that whole ordeal. Like I'm, still to this day convicted of criminal slander in Perugia, Italy, based upon the outcome of that interrogation, where people say, oh, I committed a crime in that space and I deserved 3 years of imprisonment for what I experienced in that room, which was a deep violation of my human rights and in a deep abusive situation. For me to have had a crime committed against me and then to have been vilified and convicted and condemned and served prison time for having been a victim of a crime is an extra layer of just trauma that I have around that aspect of my story. And so for me, I felt a tremendous responsibility, first of all, personally to get it right, but also now as a criminal justice reform advocate who is trying to like shed light on what really happens in interrogation rooms and how we need to change our practices to protect innocent people from these kinds of outcomes. It is something that I'm deeply, deeply invested in because it didn't just happen to me, like this happens all the time here in the US. These same kind of interrogation practices are being used, and it's just unconscionable, but and yet it persists. And so for me, like that was where my advocacy work was coming very much to the forefront, and all of those layers of of significance for me led it to be the part of the story where once we did get it right and I felt like we got it right, I was so relieved that I just fell to pieces in the same way, honestly, that I fell to pieces when I was acquitted for the first time. Like everyone, I remember like I just lost it. I lost it when I got, acquitted, released from prison, all of that. And everyone thought that I had misunderstood the verdict. They were like, why are you crying? You won. And it's like, I know I've been like holding on for 4 years, hoping and being afraid to hope. And now this thing has finally come together. And I feel like that's a very similar experience that I'm having today with this series is like, after all of these years of struggling and living with the consequences of this terrible story that was imposed on me, I'm feeling a relief of finally being seen and believed and cared for so much by all of my creative partners.
before we go, when it comes to your advocacy work, what are your goals right now? I mean, what are your next, hopes for that space and, either policy wise or just like personally or getting the word out? What are your hopes going forward?
Yeah, policy wise, 100%, I am working to help ban police deception in interrogation rooms. I'm also interested in closing this legal loophole between interviews and interrogations. So, this is a very nuanced idea, but like in the world of law enforcement, there are two ways that you can be questioned by police. Either you're being interviewed or you're being interrogated. If you're being interrogated, you have the right to an attorney. There are certain legal things that happen that allow your human rights to be respected. But all the way up until that point, there's an interview where you are not entitled to any of those kinds of rights. And people don't understand that that is the case, and that police can just lie to you when they're questioning you. Like it's like the sort of, it's like this legal loophole that allows police to question you when they don't have to provide you counsel or any kind of legal advice, so that for me is an issue that needs to be addressed, because I think that wrongful convictions are caused just as much, like they're caused by false confessions, but they're also caused by, witness statements that are obtained under questionable circumstances. And so I think that all of these are nuanced issues that could be very easily addressed by the modern technology that we have. Even just recording all interviews and interrogations would go a long way towards helping protect innocent people from abuses of law enforcement. But right now, there's huge resistance to that, because I think that law enforcement is afraid of losing a very powerful tool for obtaining what they want. And I think the thing that I try to do when I talk to law enforcement about this is, what they want is accurate information. What they should want is accurate information, not just any information that they can get anyone to say based upon lies and gaslighting. So
Because that sounds like a lot of wasted resources.
it's a ton of wasted resources. And I think that it undermines law enforcement's relationship with all of us who go to them for help. Like, one thing that I'm constantly telling law enforcement is, I was a victim of crime before I was a victim of the criminal justice system. Someone broke into my home and raped and murdered my roommate, and I called the police for help, and they betrayed me. That should not happen. So this is where the conversation needs to be progressed, and for there to be a nuanced appreciation of what's at stake.
Yeah. Well, the show is excellent, and you may think you know the story, but this is shedding new light and new emotional layers on it. And it's also just a really compelling watch. Amanda Knox is the executive producer of The Twisted Tale of Amanda Knox. She is also the author of Waiting to Be Heard and Free: My Search for Meaning, and the host of the podcast Hard Knocks and Labyrinths. Are you guys still doing Labyrinths?
We transitioned Labyrinths into Hard Knocks.
Okay.
So it's a reimagining of Labyrinths as a more philosophical, conversational podcast.
Great. It's a great listen, and I really recommend, especially the Monica Lewinsky episode that was posted earlier this week. Amanda, thank you so much. This has been a pleasure, and it's great to get to interview you again.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to Soundside. This show is only possible because listeners support us. If you're able to give right now, please check out the show notes for a link to donate. And don't forget, you can listen live on KUOW 94.9 FM Seattle at noon and 8 p.m., Monday through Thursday, or anytime online at KUOW.org.